I just bribed the Vietnamese security guard to go up to the rooftop where the historic photo of the fall of Saigon was taken. Ho Chi Minh 1, 5. Ho Chi Minh 1, 5. Look what happened to the hidden camera. How are you guys doing? Another day in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. A lot of people ask me, a mole around the world, where is Ho Chi Minh? What are you talking about? Well, when I tell them where I am, they say, oh, dude, are you in Saigon? This city has several names. In fact, until the 17th century, it was called Prey No Cor, which means City of the Forest. In the Khmer language, the Khmers are the people who today make up the ethnic base of Cambodia. At that time, Cambodia as such did not exist, but the ethnic group that today makes up the majority of this country dominated this area. In fact, until the 10th century, northern Vietnam belonged to China. Was it lost when the Tang dynasty fell? That's why the Vietnamese and the Chinese have quite similar ethnic features. Beyond the differences that exist within China itself due to its ethnic groups as well as within Vietnam itself. In fact, the name Vietnam is derived from ancient Chinese. The Viet were this southern ethnic group and the word Nam means south. Chinese and Vietnamese, although they are different, have some similarities because Nam in Chinese means south and Nam in Vietnamese also means south. Since the 10th century, Vietnam became independent from China and began to have its own dynasties. By the 17th century, Vietnam was ruled by its last dynasty, which was called Nguyen, and this dynasty had an expansionist policy for its territory. And they took from the Khmers all this area of what is now southern Vietnam and the city of Prey No Cor. They started calling it Saigon, which is not confirmed, but supposedly Saigon means cotton tree. Whoa, Topo, what happened? It's the way to change your IP without anyone noticing. You could be in Vietnam, for example, and be connected to a network in Buenos Aires, or be in Buenos Aires and be connected to a network in New York, and what for? What is that useful for? For many things. Among them, to be able to watch series that aren't broadcast in your country, for example, or to access social networks that aren't allowed in your country. A lot of people ask me, un topo por el mundo, if I travel to China, can't I use, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram? Well, don't worry, because thanks to the VPN, you'll be able to use them without any problem. In my particular case, the one I use and recommend is Proton. Yes, because a lot of people ask me, un topo por el mundo, when you travel, do you use a VPN? Of course I do, because I go to countries where many of the social networks I use frequently, even WhatsApp, can end up being banned, but I use the VPN. Everything was going relatively well until 1859 when the French appeared and invaded this city militarily with the goal of taking over territories in Asia. What France was looking for was to have a strategic port in the south of Asia. Here we are on the banks of the Saigon River, and very close by is the Mekong River Delta, which comes from the Himalayas. Therefore, the reason for conquering this area was to be able to get into this Asian trade. A lot of products are produced here, like tea, rice, and so on. Let's agree that the French arrived a bit late to the colonial expansion. A century earlier, the English had already colonized India, and actually many years before that, they had already been messing around with the East India Company. And it was in this way that in 1859, as we mentioned, the French launched their expedition to Saigon, and 3 years later, in 1862, the Nguyen dynasty ended up signing a forced treaty with the French because they couldn't stop their invasion. And they ended up ceding Vietnamese territory so that it became a French colony. And from that moment on, that's when all the commotion started. Because once the French had conquered this area, they began to advance more and more. And they also took over the provinces of Tonkin in the north of Vietnam and Annam, which is in the center. This southern region, the French called it Cochin, but there was a difference. Tonkin and Annam were protectorates and Cochin was a colony. When someone says to you, did you go to Cochin? Well, it's exactly here, and not just anywhere in Vietnam, but in the southern part of Vietnam and the capital of Cochin. They established it in Saigon, and by 1887, the French had already made remarkable progress because they make up the territory of Indochina, and it was made up of the three Vietnamese provinces, Tonkin, Annam, and Cochin, as well as present-day Cambodia and present-day Laos. That is why, during the late 19th century and early 20th century, this was purely and exclusively a French territory, all with a colonial and exploitative system that greatly humiliated the Vietnamese people. And just as we can see tourism today from different parts of the world, the French themselves already promoted exotic tourism to their colonial territories in Indochina. And here we will find in the center of Ho Chi Minh City all the French architectural symbolism even here. This is the Paris Commune Street, which refers to that proto-socialist government that existed in Paris in 1871. And in this area, which was the governmental center of Old Saigon, we will find a monumental building covered by scaffolding. It's none other than the Notre-Dame Church. I wanted to come here to give an example of French imperialism with this tremendous construction, a replica of the Notre-Dame Church in Paris, but it's under renovation. What luck, huh? Well, if you go to the one in Paris, it's either on fire or also under renovation. I don't know how it is now. The building of the Notre-Dame Church, which we can see here, or rather, which we can see here, was inaugurated in 1883. After 6 years of construction, Notre-Dame in Paris was inaugurated in 1345, but it took 150 years to build. You can see that they improved the technique 5 centuries later. Its towers are 60 meters high. But we can't see it, obviously, and I'll tell you that it has a neo-Gothic style which we can enjoy through its photos. I came all the way here to see Notre Dame in photos. According to official figures, building it cost about 2.5 million French francs at the end of the 19th century. I kind of updated that to today's money, taking into account the conversion to dollars and then different inflation calculations. And I get that the cost was, in today's purchasing power parity, about $5 million. And you're going to tell me, no, un topo por el mundo, you must have made a mistake in your calculation because $5 million to build such a majestic building? And I repeat, adjusted for inflation, this should easily cost over $30 million. It should also be clarified that it's not the same size as the Notre Dame in Paris, but this one is a little smaller. But the thing is, the significant cost they had was in the materials which they brought from France. Then the labor was very, very cheap because they used the workforce of the colonized Vietnamese to build it. So, is that why it turned out so cheap for them? Watch out. And the French built such a church in a country where no one was Catholic? They intended to set up Jesuit missions and get the locals to convert to Catholicism, but it went pretty badly for them. To this day, roughly about 5% of the Vietnamese population identifies as Catholic. At the same time, there's roughly an equal percentage of the population that identifies as Buddhist. But the vast majority of Vietnamese people don't have any religion because, hashtag communism. Or they belong to the traditional Vietnamese religion, which has a Confucian origin and is called Tao Luan. The bells of Notre-Dame de Saigon are ringing. I wonder if they have a hunchback in there. And in front of the Notre-Dame Church, we have the old Post and Telecommunications Office, which was inaugurated in 1891 after 5 years of construction. The same story as Notre-Dame. Materials brought from France, extremely cheap labor with Vietnamese workers. The architect of this building was Marie-Alphonse Faudreau, or however it's pronounced. Many people think it was Gustave Eiffel, but Gusti only worked on antennas like the Eiffel Tower, for example. But he wasn't the one who built this building. If we look at it, it looks like a train station, but don't be mistaken, it was always the Post and Telecommunications Office. There was never a train station here, but it has a similar architecture. And it was even built at the same time as the Plaza Constitución building in Buenos Aires. Yes, you might say, Topo, can you stop thinking about Plaza Constitution? Okay. My suburban soul flourishes here, and today, a quarter of the 21st century has already passed. In this building, the post office is still operating, and all these people here are writing a letter and standing in line to send it. To get the stamp from this post office, someone should tell these people that email exists. But well, they want to do it in a folkloric, romantic, nostalgic way. Maybe for many centennials or Generation Z who are part of this line, this could be the first letter they are sending in their lives. I've fallen into the trap. I'm going to send a postcard too. Here we have Ho Chi Minh, and here we have a Vietnamese peasant woman. We're sending them to Buenos Aires. Let's see if they arrive. I forgot how to write by hand. I never learned. Anyone who knows my handwriting knows it's a mess. Each postcard costs 30,000 dong, and each stamp to send them to Argentina also costs 30,000 dong. You have to stick it on. Now here you have it. This is like a sticker, or do we use saliva? That's it, we're done. I feel like my Uncle Valentin doing this. And do you leave them here, in this basket? I imagined there would be a mailbox, something more symbolic, but it's just a plain plastic basket. Look, here you have the old phone booths, and up there you have the entire old map of the telegraph lines of Vietnam and Cambodia. Hi mom, guess where I'm calling you from? Hi old lady, guess where I'm calling you from? Right in the historic center of old Saigon, we're going to find the book street. But one particular thing is that until 1945, 80% of Vietnamese people were illiterate. Like me right now, I don't understand anything. The French had built a culture for the elite, and the common Vietnamese people were left to fend for themselves. That's why French isn't spoken in Vietnam today. Well, Chinese isn't spoken either, because it's been over 1,000 years since they stopped being part of the Chinese Empire. They have their own Chinese language, which was preserved even though there are traces of French colonization. The language spoken is Vietnamese, because the people kept it alive. And among the 20% of Vietnamese who could actually read, there was a person who didn't belong to the elite but was actually part of the middle class, lower middle class. We're talking about Nguyen Sinh Cung, by his nickname Ho Chi Minh, which means the one who enlightens, and we have him represented back here. Hello comrade, hello, okay, Vietnam. This guy here, along with other guys. At the beginning of the 20th century, they began to question French colonialism. The social indifference that existed was disastrous. They were surrounded by luxury and comfort for the rulers, and exploitation and oppression for the people. And that's how Ho Chi Minh became part of the founding of the French Communist Party at that time, and later also founded the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Dude, what a huge mall. In Vietnamese socialism, keep in mind that many people joined the Communist Party in the early 20th century because of its anti-colonialist character. We're talking about a time when Lenin had developed his work on imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism. So, one of the few parties within socialism that criticized imperialisms was the Communist Party, because there were many socialist parties that put forward the idea that European colonization brought progress and development to underdeveloped countries. And despite these revolutionary movements, the French dominated all this area of Indochina with great splendor during the first part of the 20th century. This is Tong Hoi Street. We can say that it is the most distinguished and aristocratic in historic Saigon. Here we can find beautiful French architecture buildings, and at the same time there are restaurants, cafes, and so on, that still maintain that opulent style. It's like the Recoleta, the Polanco of Saigon. This building is not under construction, but it has a stage set up at its entrance and it belongs to none other than the Saigon Opera House, a building constructed exactly in the year 1900. And unfortunately, we can't go inside because there was a show right at the entrance and there are no events these days. Because if you can't get a ticket, you come to enjoy an opera and get to see it from the inside. But that's not going to happen. In case you're wondering, what is this building behind me? It's the Ho Chi Minh City Hall and it used to be the administrative center of Saigon. This reminds me a bit of Shanghai, where the whole international concession was like this, luxurious by the river, and you see all this and say, wow, what luxury. But it wasn't the Vietnamese who lived like this, it was just a small part of the population. And you might be wondering, how long did this last? Un topo por el mundo until Nazi Germany invaded France and then everything came crashing down. France had a puppet state, which was the Vichy Republic, and in which they were hypothetically part of the Axis. And that's how Japan, which was in an expansionist phase, let's remember, since 1932, had already invaded the Manchuria region in China and was advancing south. In 1937, it invaded Shanghai, and in 1940, when Germany invaded France. It's the moment for Japan, allied with Germany and therefore with the Vichy Republic, to begin advancing toward the Indochina region. And that's how the city where we are now, Old Saigon, became part of the Japanese Empire. But in the meantime, many people were joining and enlisting in the communist ranks to fight against colonial domination. There, in fact, they formed a more unifying fighting force, which was the Viet Minh. In 1945, World War II ended and this area became a French colony again, but with a huge internal movement. The Viet Minh was strengthened. And that's how France went to war against the Vietnamese forces until 1954. In the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, they ended up being defeated and driven out of this territory, which definitively dethroned French imperialism in Indochina. But at that moment, the United States was on edge. They were afraid of the Soviet and Communist advance throughout Asia. And they made a treaty in Geneva to partition Vietnam, just like they had done with Korea. They created a communist North Vietnam, administered by the members of what they called the Viet Cong, the Viet Communists, and a capitalist South Vietnam, being a puppet of the United States. And that's how they established the city of Saigon as the capital of South Vietnam. And they proposed non-governmental organization as the leader of Vietnam. Tin Dinh, who was one of the most nefarious and corrupt people who could have governed this place. After all that mess, the Americans showed up. Vietnam War conflict. That's something we'll talk about in depth in another video because it deserves a separate video that might last 2 hours. And in 1975, the Vietnam War ends, the Viet Cong triumphs over the United States. And this is the place where Hubert Van Ness took the epic photo of the fall of Saigon when the Americans were escaping by helicopter from that rooftop. Many people believe that was the United States Embassy, but actually, as far as I understand, they were CIA officers. Here my friend is letting me through, yes. How much? 100? 100. 100. No, that's too much. 10,000. Ah, come on. Thank you. I just bribed a Vietnamese security guard to go up to the rooftop where the historic photo of the fall of Saigon was taken. He asked me for 100,000. I mean, what he's really doing is pocketing the money. The guy keeps that cash for himself, but I negotiated it down to 80. I still think it's random that he charged me, but whatever. It's about $3. Maybe it was supposed to be free, I don't know. Oh no, look, it's an abandoned bar. There used to be a bar here, right where the iconic photo was taken, and here I am going up. The same stairs that the Americans used to escape and get onto the helicopter were on the roof of this machine room. A prequel to the 2001 crisis in Argentina. Wow, I'm blown away by this. At that time, it had been 26 years since the fall of Saigon, and now we're almost 26 years from 2001. Something that seems as distant as the fall of Saigon in 2001. A time that I lived through consciously. I was already a teenager. The same number of years had passed as today. The 2001 crisis. Hashtag a mole around the world got depressed. Man, I can't believe I'm in such an epic and iconic place. I'm in old Saigon looking at modern Ho Chi Minh. Is this crazy? Over there you can see the Notre-Dame Church, the Telecommunications Palace, and the Ho Chi Minh City Hall. The Bitexco Tower, which is one of the tallest, and behind me an iconic place that was part of a historic turning point for the Vietnamese people. The communists end up winning. Vietnam, the following year, in 1976, is reunified and the capital of the country becomes Hanoi, which was the capital of Vietnam. And the city of Saigon is renamed Ho Chi Minh in honor of the Vietnamese revolutionary leader who died in 1969. He couldn't see his dream of finally freeing Vietnam from the Americans and achieving the reunification of his country come true. The guy fought against the French, fought against the Americans, and ended up dying without seeing the ultimate glory, but his people did get to see it. Although, well, seeing how things are today, I have to say I don't know if he really ended up winning. Well, all this is to explain to you why the city of Ho Chi Minh is also called Saigon. Alright, folks. Look at what happened to the undercover camera Chow Chiz while recording a time-lapse. It fell down because of the wind, even though it was tied up, but anyway. What do we do? What do you all think? Can it be fixed or is it time to buy a new one? What do you say?